Migrant workers are the backbone of many economies in Asia and Middle East. They also provide a vital source of income for their families back home. But the pandemic has hit these workers hard as some have lost their jobs or faced salary cuts. And some struggle with just trying to get their next meal on the table.
Well, the Straits Times correspondents around the region talk to these migrant workers to hear their stories. And today we have Indonesia correspondent Linda Yulisman, who's in Jakarta, to tell us more. So, Linda, the migrant workers in Singapore have been housed in alternative accommodations to safeguard their well-being from the virus. Their meals are also taken care of. But workers in other countries in the region don't have the same measures in place. So you spoke to some Indonesian workers in Malaysia who have stopped working due to the country's movement control order, and it's the same situation for many of the Bangladeshi workers there as well. So what are the struggles that they shared with you?
Yes, in general, the migrant workers in Malaysia I talked to are struggling to meet both ends meet, and they feel very distressed. Daily wage workers such as construction laborers lost their jobs because the Malaysia's movement control order implemented since March 18 has halted a lot of projects. Now they can only eat everything they have, such as plain rice or noodles. They also cannot pay their monthly rent or send money to their families back home. The situation is even more worse for undocumented workers as they also fear being arrested. And right now, most of them are depending on the food aid from labor rights groups such as Migrant Care and Tenaga Nita, and also Indonesian Embassy in Kuala Lumpur, and also consulate generals across Malaysia. Another concern is about the improper housing. Many of them share houses with up to 4 people in one room, so this situation may increase the risk of infection.
Now, Linda, let's move over to the situation in the Philippines. Over the weekend, the Philippines also shut its airports, leaving the Filipinos working abroad stranded and unable to return home. What's the latest on the situation there?
Well, many Indonesian migrant workers also face a similar situation. They are now stranded abroad and cannot return home. A lot of them actually have no choice except going home because their work contracts have expired and their employers do not want to have extensions. A number of them, however, have managed lately to arrive in Jakarta and other cities where there are airports serving international flights. But actually, they cannot return to their hometowns because the local airports shut and other transportation modes do not operate as Indonesian capital and some regions implement social distancing measures. Also, the government has banned the massive exodus ahead of Hari Raya Idul Fitri that will fall on May 25. Migrant worker activists have voiced their concerns over this issue and have urged the Indonesian government to facilitate the return of migrant workers, especially those losing their jobs abroad, to return to Indonesia and their respective hometowns, while also still applying the appropriate health procedures such as 14-day quarantine. Actually, there have been around 89,000 Indonesian migrant workers returning home, and another 16,000 will likely do so, according to reports cited by Indonesian President Joko Widodo this morning.
Well, Linda, we talked about the situation in Malaysia as well as the Philippines. So what are the authorities in the countries doing to help the workers? We understand that embassies and community-based organizations have extended as much help as they can to the workers, but are these measures actually making some dents?
Yeah, the embassies and community-based organizations have provided food aid to migrant workers to help them survive day by day. However, the aid has so far only covered a little number of migrant workers. For instance, in Malaysia, there are estimated 3.3 million Indonesian workers, and from the figure, only 1.2 million are documented. The embassy has so far distributed more than 200,000 packages of staple food. So the basic issue here is how to speed up the food aid distribution to reach many others. And it is also important to note that the aid provided for these migrant workers are minimal, comprising only rice, noodles, canned fish that can last in just a few days. sufficient to keep the migrant workers out of hunger, but they really need more sustainable aid in the future.
Now, Linda, so on one hand, we have the migrant workers in Malaysia who are, facing some struggles. The migrant workers in Hong Kong, they seem to face a better situation there, which we talked about earlier as well with the case in Malaysia. Could you tell us more about the situation in Hong Kong?
Yeah, actually, things are starting to look up for the workers in Hong Kong as activities gradually return to normal in contrast with many other countries. They are resuming work as usual, but they actually face another looming threat, the fear of being fired. Some of their employers are now talking about the bad economic situation in Hong Kong after the COVID-19 pandemic, and some others have even been fired by their companies. As a result, the employers try to cut their household spending and they dismiss their domestic workers. A number of Indonesian migrant workers are facing this situation right now, so they have no alternative except to return home because there's no certainty of finding a new job soon. And in this case, I think the government must facilitate their return.
Well, thank you so much, Linda, for the insights. And that was our Indonesia correspondent, Linda Yulisman, who shared with us the struggles faced by migrant workers in the region.